I'm Beth Pariseau, Senior News Writer at Tech Target, and this is IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. Doug Merritt was CEO of Splunk from 2015 to 2021 and led the company's transition from an on-premises software company to a cloud-based service provider. After 2 years in the venture capital and board advisory space, Merritt joined multi-cloud networking company Aviatrix as CEO in 2023. That company introduced its first security product, a distributed firewall for Kubernetes, in May. Hi, Doug. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on.
So you and I actually last spoke and also first spoke in July. What is new with Aviatrix since then?
It's been a busy summer for Aviatrix. Just step back really quickly for folks. We are a software-defined networking company. We've got a full-fledged platform that is natively architected for clouds and resides natively inside of AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle's cloud, Alibaba, and we just released native integration with Equinix and Megaport as two edge providers that both have their own fabrics that they're trying to extend and integrate with clouds so that organizations can do a better job of managing hybrid landscapes. What we've been focused on over the summer and going into fall, our 7.2 release has a number of different security enhancements. One of our differentiations is that we have a data plane that lives within those clouds. And what that really means is we're interrogating packets, moving packets, optimizing packets. We've got a data plane, control plane, a management plane, a whole analytics framework. And if done properly, security is just part and parcel of networking. I think it was separately addressed because the need for vendors through the years to have purpose-built boxes to actually do their job effectively. You had big enterprises that were trying to move a lot of packets. It would make sense to have a box just for routing, a box just for VPNing, a box just for switching, just for NATing, and just for things like firewalling. The way that the SDN pundits envision the world is probably the way that the first internet networking architects did, which is there's a whole series of networking services, and security is part of that. Part of what Aviatrix has been focused on is how do we bring security as just a native aspect of everything that happens within networking. When I think about the jobs that most CISOs have. Obviously, the threat landscape is crazy right now, but at the core, there are two areas where you can actively, truly stop threats and manage activities. One is at the endpoint, and the other is the network. Those are the base layer. They're kind of ring zero, I'd say, on the security fight. And then there's obviously a whole host of different security focus areas that you want to drive. While our chops are in the networking space, the strength of our offering comes from our security capability.
What did you add in 7.2 as far as security features?
The major release that we've been emphasizing is cloud perimeter security. Most organizations are very focused on preventing bad things from happening, what people would generally call ingress orientation, which is very important. I think most people, if they're honest, will recognize it's almost impossible to stop everything. People have been a little bit less focused on egress orientation. In cloud in particular, a lot of the VPCs or VNets or VCNs, the different virtual containers that try and isolate workloads for organizations, it's not always necessary that they've got some type of security filter between that security construct and the internet. And many people, when they do have something, they might just have a network address translation gateway there as a mechanism to help with IP protection, IP exhaustion, but then that raw connectivity. But if you think about the kill chain, assuming that there might be something inside your cloud that you're not aware of, if you can do a much better job of filtering egress, getting visibility on egress, having security policies on egress, that's a critical component of the kill chain. It's really difficult to operate malware or to direct things that are occurring inside a cloud if you don't have a secure connection, a round trip connection. So what we're talking a lot about is a lot of discussion on what we're calling cloud perimeter security. And a lot of the features in 7.2 are addressing higher visibility, more integrated threat intel, greater refinement on the filters that are in place. And that is complementing our other key area that we've been focused on, which is as the hybrid landscape continues to get more hybrid, connecting your data centers or your edge frameworks to the cloud continues to be important for organizations. We've got a software-based framework we call high-performance encryption that allows encrypted traffic between an edge and your cloud at line rate without any hardware or pulling of circuits. It's all software-based high-performance encryption. When people are looking at Aviatrix in the coming months, and with LLMs becoming more and more important and distribution being a general component there, encryption, I think, becomes more important. So how do you do that in encrypted fashion? Then what are you doing with cloud perimeter security and security egress?
On that hybrid front, when we spoke in July, you mentioned that things like AI, which often involves data processing at the edge, means that data centers are going to be cool again. We've also seen a kind of broader shift. Some companies like VMware have been very outspoken about a shift away from public cloud. So, are you seeing that trend have an effect on security operations?
For sure. I probably wouldn't be as aggressive as VMware. I don't see a shift away from public cloud, but I do see more thoughtfulness on what goes to the cloud and what doesn't. And with Gen AI, if you really look at the architecture of what does it take to effectively and affordably power an AI strategy, the core architecture is pretty different than what AWS evangelized years
Mm,
ago, right? Moving everything to be ephemeral and microservices based and horizontal scale out, no hard tie between the software layers and underlying infrastructure. I think most of us have really studied Gen AI. It's like, oh my God, this is a shift probably as dramatic as that from the
mm,
silicon layer all the way up. Obviously, NVIDIA front and center with GPUs, but there's a whole host of competing Gen AI oriented silicon offerings coming out. It's changing networking, it's changing storage characteristics. And whenever that happens, the cloud vendors have been on top of it and they're trying to make sure that they offer effective Gen AI services, but you wind up with fragmentation. If you really want to take advantage of Gen AI effectively, most CIOs I know are stepping back and really trying to be thoughtful of, do I just shove all my data to whatever my favorite public cloud is, or do I start to be a little bit more thorough on what data goes there
mm,
and doesn't? And if it's not going there, where is it going? Is it in my own data center I construct from scratch? Am I going to a specialty third-party vendor that's really focused on these Gen AI workloads? Am I doing both, mixing and matching those, plus whatever I'm doing with ChatGPT with Microsoft or Bedrock or Gemini with AWS and GCP? And I think that is what's beginning to drive even more thoughtfulness on hybrid. Uh,
mm,
Although I think the CIOs the past 2 years were starting to really realize, hey, we try to push almost all our workloads to the cloud. Not everything belongs in cloud. Like some of the
mm.
stuff is better architected for other data centers as well. So I think that movement was that just the thoughtfulness on what goes where was increasing. And I think Gen AI has just made it more important. And as you do that, then security, going back to your core question about the security, becomes really, it's always critical. It's now been more
Sure.
critical because you've got more distributed workloads.
How is that different? I mean, if you're doing more on-premises and edge workloads, say, and not necessarily sending everything to cloud, how does that change things in the network security realm?
So, one of the biggest issues that organizations have had forever is tracing visibility and operationalization and execution as
Mm,
packets traverse multiple different spots around the globe. And I think that hybrid landscape continues to make that even more problematic for folks. If we just go to the work that NVIDIA is doing to try and build interesting and competitive data centers for these Gen AI workloads, they're
mm,
doing awesome stuff to try and optimize networking efficacy within those data centers. And that's within the data center. What is the enterprise networking layer that ensures that you've got traceability and control and embedded security and effective operationalization of those packets as they're moving between this multitude of different footprints now? And all the way down to something as simple as, how do you ensure that a policy, let's say a security policy, a firewall policy, is uniformly applied no matter where that packet lives, no matter where it travels. And right now, there's not a lot of good answers. The networking within that's provided by the cloud service providers themselves tends to be trapped within that
mm,
cloud. You
mhm,
can't deploy a AWS transit gateway inside of third-party clouds, as an example, which is a routing construct. And we're seeing
mm,
the same thing with these Gen AI oriented data centers. And that's where, at the core of what we do, network security is really the reason people do business with us. But part of why we're so strong is we've got that agnostic networking plane, that
mm,
agnostic data plane that lives in all of those different landscapes, so that you do maintain that visibility, uniform security, overall operational efficacy, and ultimately freedom and choice and independence. And when you think about lock in, it's worse at the lowest levels, like network lock in,
mm,
compute lock in, storage lock in, really hard to break. As you go up the stack, going back to the old OSI metaphor, lock in's still a thing, but it's not as pervasive. Networking is pervasive. I might be
right.
locked in with a SaaS app company because I've chosen to do business with them. But that's only one workload or one set of footprints I've got to worry about versus if I'm really locked in that networking layer, it constrains my choice quite a bit.
It's interesting you mentioned the initial joining of SecOps and NetOps and then how those things split. Maybe during your time with Splunk, or if it's been since you've been with Aviatrix, how have you seen that split emerge? And then is it going back in the other direction?
When I think about why does a CIO or a VP of engineering architect their landscape in a certain way, I think there's a multitude of reasons: competencies, checks and balances, execution and focus, and things like security operations, infrastructure, IT operations, DevOps as another one, network ops. There's always this desire to make it one.
Mm,
And then when I think about how do I make sure that my landscape is effective, it's really difficult to have it be one because the security teams are going to have a whole different competency and passion and focus on security. And it's
mm-hmm,
hard to have that same competence as you would on infrastructure optimization, which something like a infra, a DevOps or IT ops team would have, which is going to be different again than let's just go to QA or QE versus you can go all the way down where are the different spots on an org chart before you get a final product. I think trying to make network ops and SecOps much more aware of the challenges that they each face and how they both influence each other is really important. But it's difficult to transition capability and responsibility from one group to the next.
mm-hmm,
And network ops as an example, like when I think about who ultimately has got the administrative privileges and the responsibility of deploying a networking framework within the cloud, it
mm-hmm.
doesn't tend to be the security teams. It almost
Right.
always is a cloud platform engineering team or a network engineering team, somebody with those credentials. But should security care? Yeah, a lot, because this is the ground zero for security. And if the
Mm-hmm,
networking is deployed properly, it gives the security team a whole host of visibility and confidence that they wouldn't have if they weren't involved in that decision. And that is where I think a lot of the tension lives. It'd be great if, like, think about the developer shift left movement. It'd be great if every developer was expert in security coding practices, was expert in UE, was expert in QA, really understood how infrastructure worked and wasn't bleeding infrastructure with the way they deployed there. It'd be awesome. If I ever
mm-hmm.
met that developer, I would run to hire them. But I
Yeah.
don't expect that. It's so much of a load to carry. And then also be the world's best XYZ coder, Golang coder, Python coder,
Mm-hmm.
and know your function. And so we wind up with specialization for a reason, I think.
Mm,
But because the metrics are different and the personalities are different, the backgrounds are different, there's always friction. And I don't know how to get rid of the friction other than know that it's going to be there and then try and
mm,
help communicate as much as possible and have them share metrics as much as possible. But
mm.
I just want some friction. I want my SecOps teams being a little bit of a pain in the butt before I roll something out because the
Mm-hmm.
consequences are pretty high.
So have you seen that change at all in recent years in terms of those teams collaborating more or any kind of organizational changes along those lines as we hear about DevSecOps and bringing them together?
I think it got a lot worse in a sense.
Hmm.
But what I saw happen with most organizations is there's a lot of excitement around cloud, and
Mm.
CIOs were both interested themselves and getting pressure from around the organization, like, what are you doing with cloud? What are you doing with cloud? And whenever they got their passion for it, they began to work with their core teams, like, hey, what are we doing to get to cloud? And those teams didn't always respond as quickly as they wanted to because they had a
Mm.
lot to do.
Mm-hmm.
Most IT teams have got 85% maintenance and 90% maintenance of all the stuff they're already managing, and that's already on prem. And so they
Mm.
did a logical thing, which is let me fork off a cloud team. And the message from the CSPs was don't worry about things like network ops or SecOps or infrastructure ops. We take care of it for you. It's all good. Developers, you rule the roost, just go and it'll all work. So that's where I think I got worse to an extent. You got a lot of developer speed. You got a plethora of apps and functionality, which was great. But I think in the past couple of years, CIOs are starting to pick their head up. It's like, oh my gosh, especially as the CISO's coming in, it's like, oh, it doesn't look the way it should. We're having downtime that we weren't expecting. We don't have the visibility that we want. There's security vulnerabilities we weren't aware of. And so what I'm seeing is the reformation of those, re-empowerment
Hmm.
of the security teams, because cloud kind of had a hall pass in many cases. The re-empowerment of the networking teams, the re-empower the IT ops and infrastructure optimization teams. And the positive trend I've seen is a lot of the development teams or cloud platform teams that say, I have it all, go away, are now much more open. It's like, I I learned a lot, and thank you for your expertise. But by the way, can you freshen up your skills? Like you might know, you
Mm.
might be a CCIE level 5, and you know everything about Cisco networking. That's not working here. Can we help you get up to speed over here? But that networking expertise is awesome because we don't have it. I think we do this right. You wind up re-empowering those teams, but revitalizing them, making them current, because cloud does work pretty significantly differently than most of the data centers that the folks are coming from.
At least in the last 10 or so years, it seems like data breaches just keep increasing in terms of their size and cost. How can the industry improve that picture in the future, or can they?
Um, So one, cloud perimeter security. That's one. Focus on egress. I had a really interesting conversation with the CIO the other day who's on top of some critical infrastructure. And I was asking, so what do you think about egress? Because I don't even care. Like there's nothing interesting about our data. It's not proprietary. We don't have PII. That's not important. Making sure people don't get in. That's all I'm focusing on. Then we had that whole kill chain discussion. It's like, oh, yeah, maybe I should be a little more focused on that. Exfiltration is really important.
Mm.
And every bad guy needs a way to stay connected to the breach that they've had. But I really think Gen AI is going to be critically important. As we all know, a lot of bad actors have ramped pretty quickly on how to
Mm-hmm.
use language models and other AI technologies to up their game a little bit more. And I think the dilemma that most of us find ourselves in is it's hard to manufacture enough skills, enough skilled people with enough of an edge and capability to keep up with what's occurring. And that's where 10 years out, I don't know what happens with this AI wave. I think it's up in the air for all of us. For the next 4 to 8 years, I see it as highly beneficial. And I
Mm.
don't even see it as labor dislocating as people think it will be, because
Mm.
I think everybody will start to raise their game. I think it provides a level of capability that really augments our teams for those that are willing to embrace it. And I think everyone's going to raise their game pretty quickly. So we're still going to need superstar SecOps folks. They're just going to be that much better because of Gen AI. And again, 5 plus years, 10 plus years, we'll see where it evolves. But right now, I see it as an advantage that people have to take advantage of. Like it's almost a mandate to begin to take advantage of it. And I know we're all wrestling with the costs and the value that we're getting
Well,
back.
yeah,
But
quality too, right? In terms of hallucinations and confidently giving you completely false answers. How can
that's
we trust AI to secure AI?
for the time being, that's where I think people are going to be really important. You can't go to a conference now without hearing agentic
Sure.
15 times. And
Mm-hmm.
again, super exciting. Yeah, medium and long term. There are very few processes I feel comfortable enough. And we've tried, that was one of my aggressive mandates or asks within the company because I came in July of 2023. That was, I don't know, 9 months after ChatGPT 3.0 was
Mm.
released. It's
Yeah.
just like, hey, we're going to go all in. Like there's so much benefit we can get. And it's been so much harder than we thought to get the
Yeah.
value like everybody else. But we are starting to see green shoots. I'm getting some great results in different areas of the company. But there's nothing, including our support area, there's nowhere that I still would feel confident to say, you know what, it runs on its own, where
Mm.
it's as good and as reliable. But the power we're getting, I'll give you an example, just in the business development rep and AE, account executive, sales arena,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of information that they're able to get augmented with LLM utilization, a
Mm-hmm.
whole host of data integrations we're doing and curation of that data, and then LLM integration. And we've got our own vector DB and we're managing our own RAG is really impressive. The amount of benefit that I'm seeing as far as velocity and accuracy of engaging prospects is something I haven't seen before, but it took us a year plus to get to the point where I feel confident, and I wouldn't feel confident saying, oh, thank goodness, I don't need any BDRs or AEs. Like, you guys go
Yeah.
home. This is going to
Right.
operate on its own.
Right.
I think in the security space in particular, there's so much work that corporations are doing and the vendors are doing to try and help reduce the hallucinations. And we'll get there over time. I think that's where, going back to these distributed frameworks, there's the large language models, which are incredible, but they've got to be complemented by small or medium language models, vertically
Mm.
models, function specific models, function just to security. So we need industry, geo, size of company, function that you're in, like the triangulation of all those to try and get the efficacy and the knowledge where it needs to be. Um, like in humans, experience still counts, thank goodness. As I'm getting
Yeah.
like, hey, those lessons I learned actually mean something. Right.
Hmm.
the same with AI and Gen AI is like you've got to narrow to really get high value in areas where the answer truly matters. I think you got to narrow this. My view so far, a year and a half into playing with it, is you got to narrow the set.
Have you done anything in the AI realm in security automation yet?
Yes, yeah, we're really
Uh-huh.
excited about that. So we got some announcements coming out, both Ignite and at reInvent. I've held off on doing any big jump up and down about AI because I really wanted there to be something that we liked and were comfortable with and had tested
Mm,
and felt like it was truly adding customer value. The target was how do we get to autonomous networking eventually? The network is always listening, adapting, and reconfiguring itself. And truly agentic networking, we're not there at all yet. I think it's going to take a ways for the world to get there. But the assistance that we've been starting to see as we are taking the packet data that we have and then a bunch of other data that we're seeing across these clouds and marrying it with third-party data, Intel data, CVs, et cetera, to start to provide much more targeted and specific guidance
mm,
for security and network people of what's really happening across their pretty diverse landscape. A lot of our customers have got workloads in Google, AWS, and Azure, and their own data center. And it's again going back to that, it's so hard to trace the packets and what's happening. And that's again, we can do some great stuff. We're going to rename our product that was once called Copilot, which
mm,
was because Aviatrix is a female pilot, and the Copilot
hmm.
analytics framework that guided the pilot. And then
Uh,
Copilots became the thing. But we can do a lot with our visualizations in our analytics framework that are
mhm.
really, really helpful. Like there's some beautiful visualizations there. There's one step below of, okay, now here's in detail what's happening underneath those visualizations. And here's a vulnerability you should be aware of. And click this link if you want to correct it and close that loop, which we've been getting some interesting success with.
How do you address that concern about accuracy and quality and hallucinations? Is it a matter of properly training the foundational model, or, how do you address customers' concerns about the risks there?
We're querying the foundational models and bringing it back to and for further filtering and the
Hmm.
layers that we're crafting. So it's a combination of the two. But what we'll show at both shows and where we are with our customers right now as we begin to release this is that there is a human in the middle. Like everything is verify still. Here's what we're seeing. Here's the data behind it. Based on that, here's a recommended action, but go and verify it. Like make sure it's up to you to verify and do that task. It's a lot like a sim, which Splunk definitely had their foot in, which
Mm,
is the volume of incidents and events you got was overwhelming.
mm,
All we're trying to reduce that volume, but it was still up to the SOC to weed through that volume and then figure out what do we actually do. And I think this wave collapses that pretty dramatically. It's getting from hundreds or thousands of incidents events, if we do this right, down to a few tens with the corrective action already built in, which is exciting for me. Having walked through a lot of SOCs, like if we can get there, I think that's a huge step forward. That's very practical. And then at some point again, like we will get to much more autonomous and self-healing and self-correcting. And I don't think that's the next 12 months for anyone.
yeah.
I ladder that.
Yeah, that I don't think so either. Um, so sounds like there's a lot going on. I appreciate you spending the time today, and thanks for being with us.
Well, vice versa. I really appreciate the invitation, and hopefully there'll be more of these in the future.
This has been IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. If you have any feedback on this episode or want to share questions, comments, or stories we should consider covering, please reach out to me at B as in boy, P as in Peter, A R I S as in Samuel, E A U at techtarget.com. Please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast on your platform of choice. And tune in next week for our continued conversations with industry experts about the challenges facing security operations. Thank you for being with us so far.